Chris, thank you so much for coming on Startup Steroid today. I'm really excited to talk to you about F3 and what you're trying to achieve with that accelerator program. But before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I started my career, let's say in the late 90s, working actually in research at Hopkins, Johns Hopkins that is, and numerous different fields in looking at, let's say, typical lab science kind of business, and was really focused on that for future, and then ended up moving into the biomedical space. Left Hopkins to get involved with two biomedical startups in that particular area, and then jumped into the ag world around 2004 or 5. And that began a pretty long career in varying parts of the industry, from technology to distribution to manufacturing, actually starting in South America and then heading back to the US. And currently today, I am the program director for F3, after having stepped down from my last executive role, working with a group in Miami, and currently also the founder of a group of agricultural technology and therapeutic companies.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you've been in the agricultural industry for better part of the last 20 years, 17, 18 years at least. Tell us about some of the experiences and what you sort of achieved in that period.
Yeah, so I began that work actually in Chile, and it was involved with numerous bits of the agricultural industry there as they began to put together, let's say, some larger focuses on international business in agriculture, dealing with organic products or trade products, seafood, and that expanded into the development of a pretty good group of retail products over the years, probably about 65 to 75 that I've been involved with. And that then led me a little bit more specifically into some of the roles that I've had since then, which is working with turnaround organization and investment in numerous bits of the food industry, from distribution in the US as well as abroad, including what would then be the kind of beginning of land-based aquaculture about 12 years ago. And since then have remained actually quite involved in all of those fields as an advisor to some companies and helping to develop others. And that's really kind of brought me back around to where we were now, which was to put together a culmination of everything from my science background to that in the food industry, as well as in developing new companies, working with the investment community, and putting together now what is a very interesting and technology-driven group of companies, while at the same time being able to give back some of that experience to a group like F3.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know there's a lot of new development science coming into the agriculture industry that's essentially been stagnant for the last 150 years. Tell us about what you sort of saw coming into F3 and what the focus really is in developing sort of those next generation technologies.
Yeah, the bigger focus has been really trying to find existing technologies that are, let's say, prevalent in other areas, and how we then move those towards agriculture and provide different, let's say, methods of revenue development for those companies, as well as try to increase technology adoption in ag. Ag has been a rather interesting area. When I first got involved in it in South America, I was a little bit unaware of still how much science was there. Everything was very much similar to the chemistry and other type of work I had done in the past. And actually, I think one of the probably largest, let's say, areas of lack of knowledge by everyone from the general public on up to investors is actually the amount of technology that's involved in it, but it's been an industry that has been, let's say, much more homegrown. There are a lot more private corporations, family-owned entities. In fact, the largest privately owned company in the world, Cargill, is an ag tech company and still not public. But it has been an industry that has, in and of itself, really focused more on what it felt that its needs were and invested in that with much less outside involvement than newer areas today. So what we're trying to do is really kind of bring both sides together and speed up some of these aspects, because there obviously is this point of it's not that, and we definitely don't feel that ag can't do this itself. It's more so just trying to bring more opportunities and discussion together to move more quickly.
Absolutely, and those discussions are so important because a lot of Silicon Valley technology-based accelerators, investors, they really don't have a very deep understanding of the agricultural world. So I think that's the really missing piece. Tell us how you're sort of bringing those investors together with the new startups, and what F³ is actually, what the goal of F³ is.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, a good way to lead into that answer, which is it's always kind of ironic that we find that we feel we don't know a lot about agriculture when it's the one thing that everyone actually takes part in, right? So we all eat, but we all sometimes as well don't think we know, but I think we know a lot more than we do. I think what we don't know is about how these scales happen. And how technology has actually played into things and how it's really kind of driven the development of many countries from the beginning, which was their agriculture. So as far as F³ is concerned, what we're trying to do is just promote more of that, let's say, adoption aspect, more creative thought to travel. Originally, what we thought was from trying to develop this economic aspect from the rural areas, but more so trying to really, at this point, bring them together. We see a lot of the creativity without the specific experience, without the on-the-ground experience in the academic centers in Silicon Valley, but there's much more of the creative use experience and everyday experience in those rural areas in agriculture. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to get it done however you can. The technology and kind of ease of use aspects of things sometimes actually don't necessarily make agriculture easier. They may make it more compliant. But what we're trying to really demonstrate here and show investors is that there is a lot of overlap between a lot of other areas. Actually, a lot of technologies we use in the biotech side or general understanding of nature and ourselves actually comes from having studied animals first. But what we see is a much greater investment, obviously, on human health, and we want to take some of those aspects and push it back towards ag in that sense. Because at the end of the day, it's kind of an interesting scenario where we're actually, let's say, more inclined to put synthetic substances into our body, but we don't necessarily want to put them into the animals we consume or the plants we consume. And that's really kind of where organic has gone and all of these things, and different subsectors of the food industry over time, because we're more cognizant of that. And this is where I think we're trying to bring together a lot of these aspects, whether it's environmental, whether it's ag, whether it's even the cyber aspects now that we see. Kind of interestingly enough, F³ has been at the forefront of looking at cyber technology concerns for the last 2 years, and now as of this year, the biggest cyber concerns in the US and most recently are having to do with our food supply chain. So these are a lot of the areas that we're trying to do, which is to bring all of these sides that we're aware of together to determine whether everyone really does have that information, and to provide more of that overlap in information to show both sides that there are ways to make money that may be generally just in front of them. They just may not know about. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities in ag for technology to flow over to the biotech or software side, and there's a lot of opportunity from the reciprocal. One of the biggest things we've seen in that area really is actually trying to get software to merge a little bit better with agriculture. There are probably more versions of ag-related software and farm management and integration software that I've seen for any particular sector, but at the same time have the lowest amount of adoption. Because there are so many integral ways that it works, and at the same time, you have to make sure that it's not just digitizing what we already do. It has to have a value. It has to be make life easier, change labor, or add some compliant aspect to it.
Absolutely. So the idea is not to just add technology for the sake of adding technology. It's really to achieve the next sort of step, whatever that step may be. To that extent, one thing you sort of touched on that I want to elaborate a little bit more on is the supply chain sensitivity, and just coming out of the COVID era. We understand how sensitive those supply chains are now, especially how it relates to our food. And there's been a lot of startups in that arena. It could be everything from just supply chain management tools to using blockchain to make sure that you can track the food from inception to consumption. What kind of companies are you seeing? What kind of value add services are you seeing in that supply chain management space?
So there's been a lot of discussion of this. It actually relates to some other things that I was involved with privately as well last year that kind of came to light through the USDA and just looking at supply chain loss as it was related to COVID and what was happening, and being able to distribute. And one of the biggest things I'd say is the results that we saw in our discussions, and a lot of this happened to be related to retail, was looking at how products got to that particular point, because that was the big problem. But also at the same time, it pushed back a little bit on the let's say, procurement strategies of a lot of companies. Typically, the way that most of the industry had worked at the larger scale was that there would be a single supplier that would win a contract for a certain period of time to supply a product. But at the same time, when you have a generally one large entity that is going to be your provider, if anything fails, you're not really left with very good abilities to quickly to resolve that issue. And that's what we saw in the supply chain. That was the reason for most of it. That was why, on an unrelated topic, you could go to Walmart and not find toilet paper, but you go to a local store and you would find it. Because the local stores and the smaller stores were more capable of moving creatively or quickly without having to go through their procurement strategies or violating their contracts to solve problems. And we saw a lot of this come into play with larger retailers, some who we spoke to as well, who had professed that they would now be changing some of their procurement strategies and looking at the local, regional, then national approaches to things, but always having kind of a moving target aspect to what their business was going to be driven by, because it can't just all be one bigger player. And I think what it really, at the end of the day, and we saw this about 10 years ago as well, and I saw this in the last company I was running. At the end of the day, regardless of the certification or whatever it may be, organic, fair trade, et cetera, behind the products in the food sector, outside of dealing with industrial ag, the most important thing to people at the end of the day really is local, because it's the one that you can go to, you can solve a problem with, you can have an immediate result from. And this is really, I think, a big part of what we try to promote as well when we're specifically dealing with that, let's say, directed consumer part of the food chain, is understanding first the local options and then going from there. But as far as supply chain and logistics, that I think the interesting thing in this is we have added that as a category. It's still a small category, it's growing, but it's one that we're looking for more innovative technologies, not more just digitization of what exists.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if we really think about it, if there's anything related to everything that we consume, let's say outside of software and IT kind of things, if it has to be delivered, regardless of what's happening in the world, whether it's COVID or anything, logistics still has to occur. Logistics is still earning revenue and is still moving because it is the basis for everything that we have. So it is a really important part for us, I think, to convey that as well, because logistics is not just in the traditional sense trucking. It's the movement of those raw materials from the farm to a manufacturing facility, which will process it into different forms and move it along. And one of the biggest problems we saw from COVID was not a lack of food. In fact, there was not a lack of food. The problem was a lack of food formatted in a certain way, created in a certain way that could not be readapted, and an inability to send it to others in a different format. And as we saw the food service kind of collapse with the closing of restaurants, that food was all still there, but it was in big sizes. So how do you get that to a consumer? What do you do with that instead of throwing it away?
Right. No, that so obviously I think this market is huge, and there are a lot of challenges that I think technology can add a lot of value to. So let's talk more about specifically F³ and what you guys are doing, because I think that this accelerator program is really interesting, because you're really, the idea is to provide non-dilutive funding to a lot of the companies, non-dilutive support also. So tell us, exactly what F³ is doing and how you're sort of helping these startups.
Yeah, so the focus for the company really is, what we think is a unique approach in these types of programs. It started about 2 years ago when I and my team started looking at different ways that we felt we could, at least in the greatest capacity, achieve more success with companies. Because we think that the biggest problem with most programs is that they come together for a very short period of kind of academic review, to try to help people understand what they need to do. They complete the program and then they're off, typically, to the next one. We didn't see that as very viable, and what we wanted to do was, one, extend our involvement with companies, but two, more so, give them what they need in that consultative sense that they couldn't have otherwise, that typically would cost them either a lot of money or even without it, typically doesn't exist. And what that really is looking at a situation where we can tailor their particular needs and bring in a solution to that by the end of the program, and stand in place. And the way we've done that in the last year and a half, and are now kind of expanding upon that with this year's program, is working with a lot of the larger industrial companies in the ag tech world and cyber and biotech, talking to them about what their needs are. What do they see as the next most important sector? What could make them more competitive in their particular area? What do they feel they need to kind of jump to the next level in terms of adopting new technologies and making things move better and more quickly? And then we're taking that backwards in a way to find the best teams in those topic areas. Teams of early stage companies that we can find and then promote our program to, such that their involvement is really to prepare them for a presentation to those companies, because we've already solved that problem for them, which is, any early stage company that goes to an investor will end with the question of, so how can you guarantee me sales? Who's interested? Who's going to buy your product? So the way we looked at it was, if we can take our abilities, network, and resources, find customers for a particular product first, then go find the best people making those types of products, then the end of our program and its goal will be actually for us to spend the time and insert ourselves into that company for a few months, prepare it for a presentation to those customers at the end of it. And for us, that really gives us, let's say, a much higher level of due diligence than even an investor could do, because we're there with them every day, a group of mentors. We have about 3 to 5 that actually spend a great deal of time on it with different expertise. And we'll impart ourselves in that company to make calls for them, to figure out what they need, to kind of deconstruct what they have and then reconstruct in a way we know, either for an investment group or customer, it would be successful.
This is fantastic. I love this approach of starting with the goal in mind and then working your way backwards to find the right companies that can sort of achieve that goal. That's absolutely fantastic. I also know that you're working with a lot of, not a lot, but a handful of government and government organization or NGOs essentially to sort of help you get funding and help the startups get funding also. Tell us a little bit about that process and where the money is actually coming from.
Sure. The program itself is actually part of a local economic development entrepreneurship center, and it is funded mostly through local and state concerns, as well as USDA and EDA funding that's related to rural development, new technology development, tech transfer, and a lot of other categories that are pretty consistent with the development of new technologies and expansion into the marketplace. And those programs help us to kind of set the basis for F3. It's the funding that keeps the program moving. It's the funding that gets, or let's say, makes its way towards the accelerator program participant companies. We give them a bit of funding during the program, more so focused on keeping them interested, keeping them focused, taking care of small concerns for them, towards a program at the end where we do, like a lot of them, have a kind of last day contest to see who has the most investable project and who has made the most progress in demonstrating its investability or ability to commercialize its products more quickly. And a lot of resources that we have in between that are everything from funding to actually stand-in resources, whether it be prototyping, marketing, legal, IP, financial. We have a very good group of specific mentors on staff with up to Fortune 500 experience who are there to help them move past what would be the basics of early stage companies, but with that intent of, here's what we want to achieve and here's what we need to achieve. So we look at our position much more so as throwing money at an early stage company isn't really going to solve that problem of, I don't know how to commercialize my product, I don't know how to call this buyer, I don't know how to get in touch with this company to do a test trial. Money doesn't typically solve those issues. It's the right people, and what we want to do is to help them assure, one, they have business people involved that know those companies, because more often than not, they're the technology companies, and others that are similar tend to be more focused on developing their product than typically knowing their customers. So we stand in that part and then help associate the right people with them to assure that success.
Fantastic. So you sort of touched on high level what the founders are getting, but let's unpack that a little bit more, because traditionally when you talk about accelerators or incubators for that matter, founders generally have to give up a percentage of the equity, and they get coaching once a week, once every couple of weeks, something to that effect, and mentorship and all of that is quite limited. So tell me about what exactly is the founder signing up for when he comes to F3 and fills out that application?
Sure. As you mentioned before, it's definitely a non-dilutive program. It's one that does not request or require equity. It's actually more so what we exist to do. We exist to find companies and help to develop solutions for rural development, general economic development, and the ag tech sector, which for us really is a very, very broad scenario. It's everything from traditional ag to looking at crops and livestock to land-based aquaculture or otherwise, to looking at therapeutics and medicines for animals, down to food development, supply chain, environmental, and even now energy and energy storage and how it relates to that. So for us, we exist to not take, but to give, because our outputs and outcomes that are part of where our source funding comes from are based on that. What can we do the most, and how do we
Right.
demonstrate that we have actually created results for the local communities that they come from? So our program right now, for the foreseeable future, won't change those aspects. We don't ask for anything from these companies as well. We do have some programs in development that are actually post-accelerator program and much further down the line for international companies as well, who are already situated and want to come to the US, as well as companies in the US who are already well within their commercialization strategy, but looking for more connections or more creativity, or from a different sector, as I said before, like cyber or bio, and demonstrating how we can get them connected with companies in this particular space and find new sources of revenue. So one of the biggest aspects for the future that we think we need to also be involved with is actually this funding aspect, and looking at the types of companies we're targeting. It's mostly early stage companies who have already raised some private funding between 500 to 2 million. And that's because we want to make sure that they already have a foot in the door on that aspect, and it's not just a chasing money scenario, but more so how we can assure that success and helping. And from that, we're looking at as well to develop either our own or a collaborative fund, so that as part of our program, if the applicant company does well, there could be a more direct and immediate path to funding, since what we really see is we have a better gauge on the due diligence of those companies than you could ever get from the outside doing your typical financial due diligence, because we've been there. We were there with them. We're working with them essentially for 4 months before deciding whether there could be an investment. And we think that the value of what our program provides to investors at the end of the day is a very significant level of due diligence that you normally wouldn't be able to gauge, where we kind of throw all of the PowerPoints and Excels out the window and really figure out if this company has a path to success.
Absolutely. And speaking from an investor's perspective, that means so much. If you've been in the trenches with them, you've worked with the company day in and day out, and are now sort of promoting that company, that means a whole lot more than just getting a pretty presentation. So I completely agree with you. Now, let's talk about your next cohort that's coming up. I know you're accepting applications for that. When does it close, and what do the founders need to get ready for that?
So we're actually, we've just begun the second phase of that. It actually technically will close in July. But we have about 3 rounds that we do. So we had an initial phase application, although we can still let others in if interested. But we've moved to the second round with the first set that we've received, and that includes a kind of multi-level, let's say, interview and questionnaire process, where we'll now start getting into more specific questions about the business. Again, all of these kind of commercialization aspects, customers, definitely revenue and otherwise, but more specifically looking at the business efficacy. There'll be a lot of interviewing as well from our group, as well as from the outside, from some of the companies that we're working with on topics they're interested in, who will also give us feedback of their interest. And then the final stage will be for the final applicants to validate their position, and kind of makes a very quick jump downward. In the second phase, it goes to typically no more than 15 or 20 companies, and then that will then pare down to 5 in the end. And we've done 5 since the beginning. It's been a pretty good number for us because of the amount of time that we spend, and it is pretty significant, and thus we think, at least right now, it's good in terms of being able to spend as much time as possible and really kind of get involved with the companies more significantly. So we are still accepting those applications. They'll have to move faster and faster, but really, what we expect is it would be very similar to an investor presentation. We want to see, the history of the company. Is there IP involved? Who are the potential customers? Have you, talked to them? What are they really saying? Do you understand how to manufacture your product? and the cost associated with that. And in the end, the team. At the end of the day, that's really the important part for us. We have to believe, like an investor would, that they believe that person's going to be able to give them their money back. So for us, even though we don't expect any money back, we want to look at that company in a way to say that we believe that this company can follow through, because one of the things that we look at in our metrics is actually follow-on success. So did they complete that contract? Did they obtain more customers that we connected them to? Or did they receive that investment?
Absolutely. So you're basically using the same criteria an investor would use in analyzing that company. So I always like to end with the action step question for the founders who might be listening to us right now. And the question is, what is the one thing that they have to do before they reach out to you? And we talked about a bunch of things that they should have, but that one thing without which the conversation doesn't even start. What is that one thing for you that the founder needs to bring to you in that first conversation?
I'd say the biggest thing, there are kind of two parts, but there's one that's more important than another. In an early stage company, projecting your financials is really hard. It's an estimate. We find that some people obviously do that better than others, but in kind of going along with that, what's more important for them to know is actually why someone needs their product. The greatest, I'd say, error that we see in the development, definitely from the academic side, is a lot of solutions for problems that don't exist or exist in a small enough way, but nobody's willing to pay for the solution. And kind of inherent belief that because I made it, it's great. The best way to really kind of judge yourself, and I do it to myself as well, is try to talk yourself out of it. Go through this process, be able to get down to that root of, does somebody really need what I made, and are they willing to part with their money for it? And really understanding it, because a lot of times what we find is, besides the extremes, a lot of products are tailored towards a symptom of a problem, but not necessarily the root cause. And that's a little bit harder when you get to the bigger companies and saying, well, I talked to this buyer over here and he said he has this problem. That's great, but is that his problem, or is that the company's problem, or is that the sector's problem, or is that going to change their business tomorrow? So make sure you have an answer to those questions, which is, who needs this and why do they need this?
Yep, that's a fantastic note to end the conversation on. Thank you so much, Chris. I think we covered a lot of really important things in this conversation, a lot of important information for the founders who are sort of looking for that next step in growing their businesses. And the mission that you're on with F3 as far as working with USDA and the Small Business Association, I think that's also extremely important. So I wish you all the luck in the world, and thank you so much for coming on today and sharing that story with us.
Thank you, Deval.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.